This ad is terrible unless it's designed to turn out all of these non-college voters in the Midwest.
Turns out that's what happened.
Welcome to another episode of Campaign Experts React, where we break down 2020 election ads and political media, explain what the people behind them were trying to accomplish, and decide whether or not they did a good job. I'm Dan Pfeiffer, former communications director for Barack Obama. Joining me today is Jon Favreau, Barack Obama's former speechwriter, and my co-host on Pod Save America. Jon Favreau, welcome to Campaign Experts React. The campaign is over, but like Trump, we can't let it go, and we are still here.
Highlight of my life.
Yes, as I told you, this was going to be similar in audience and influence to your Insta Live with Kendall Jenner, so just be prepared for that. This is our campaign and review episode. We're going to look at the ads from the Trump side that best personified their strategies and message and reflect on how that worked given what we know about how the election went. But before we get into that, I want to ask you about how the campaign results, the much closer than expected race in particular, influences your view of the importance of paid advertising in campaigns.
I don't know. On one hand, in an election where Joe Biden's lead in the closest battleground states was tens of thousands of votes. So in that sense, everything mattered. And then paid advertising, of course, mattered. On the other hand, in a high turnout election where everyone was paying incredibly close attention to the news and to political news about the election, I wonder how much ads had an impact if most people were making their decisions based on the news that they were paying such close attention to.
We had our old friend, Obama strategist and resident hack on tap, David Axelrod, in this series a few months ago. And he made a point that in his experience, and this is coming from the perspective of someone who was a political ad maker for decades, that the importance of political ads is inversely proportional to the amount of press attention that a campaign gets. And I think that's probably even more true in this race, which was the most highly engaged, most highly covered race in American history. But like you said, it matters. The place where I have real questions is the down ballot, particularly the Senate races, where Democrats had massive resource advantage, yet that seemed to matter zero. I think that raises real questions about where we spend our money when we have resource advantage. And recognizing, of course, that in this campaign, there was very limited on-the-ground organizing, but were there better ways to spend that money that would have had more impact? And then the other question is, and this is why these are somewhat unanswerable, is maybe it wasn't the fact of the TV ads, but maybe it's what the TV ads were about or the digital ads were about. Was it the wrong message? Because if all of the polling was off, you were giving poor guidance about what voters wanted to hear. And so I think that's a theme we're going to come throughout all of these ads is maybe our prior analysis of what we thought worked and didn't is incorrect because it was based on incorrect information. The first ad we're going to look at is a positive spot from the Trump campaign.
In the race for a vaccine, the finish line is approaching. Safety protocols in place, and the greatest economy the world has ever seen coming back to life. But Joe Biden wants to change that.
I would shut it down.
Why would we ever let Biden kill countless American businesses, jobs, and our economic future when President Trump's great American comeback is now underway?
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I will say this about this particular Trump ad and most Trump ads. The gap between the crazy shit that Trump says on the campaign trail and tweets every day and his advertising was quite large. His ads were, I think, created and produced by your typical Republican strategist who knows that you need an actual message. Trump did not really have a message. But looking back on that ad, I wonder if it appealed to a segment of people who ended up voting for Trump who had lockdown fatigue or pandemic fatigue, and because maybe the pandemic didn't affect them directly, they cared more about the economy than they did the pandemic. And now, again, I think the question is, did that sway anyone, or did that just appeal to people who were already going to vote for Trump because they didn't give a shit about the virus?
When I saw this ad the first time, I thought it was probably one of, if not the most effective ad the Trump campaign ran, but it is effective in a different way than I thought. And because I thought that there's this giant elephant in the room throughout the campaign that the Trump campaign never talked about COVID. It's the single biggest issue in America. Whether you are deeply afraid of it or you're deeply afraid of people being too afraid of it, you can't avoid it. It's on the news. It's all anyone talks about. And the Trump campaign just never discussed it throughout the summer. And then in their sort of post-campaign shakeup advertising shift, they started talking about COVID. And I thought that was smart, and talking about vaccines smart. And you are correct. I think this is an ad made by an average Republican ad consultant. Like, there's nothing ingenious about it. It's pretty cookie cutter. But compared to the ads that were done under Brad Parscale, which were just like Sean Hannity fever dreams, were insane. This one I think is pretty good. But I was very, very dismissive the first time around of the attack on Biden for saying shut it down, because of all of this polling I saw that said that people were much more concerned about opening up too soon than staying closed for too long. And I think that polling was clearly wrong. If the polling was oversampling college-educated white voters, you're oversampling the people who care the most about COVID or are the most concerned about it. And I think this ad probably is more effective than we thought. It is a permission structure ad. It is trying to get people who they believe want to support Trump to give them some fig leaf to hang on to do it. And I think the other thing about, given the turnout in this election being so gigantically high on both sides, that the persuasion that we talked about throughout the series was mostly between, can you get these people who were skeptical of Trump to vote for Biden or for Trump? I think this is what we were really looking at, is persuasion between voting and not voting. And I don't know whether this shifted a person out from Biden's column to Trump's column, but I think it probably shifted some people who were maybe not going to vote for Trump to do vote, because it gave them, for the first time, he gave them a reason to do that.
The message of this ad was very different than Trump's message on the coronavirus. Trump's message on COVID is, COVID's not real. You can't really get sick. It's going to go away on its own. Here's some of my snake oil, your hydrochloroquine, and your bleach, and all this kind of shit. Everything will be fine. Joe Biden's message sort of occupied the middle, which was, we need to take precautions now, and we need to defeat this virus, and we can defeat this virus. And if we take sort of common sense steps to protect ourselves, then we can both defeat the virus and fix the economy, right? But what this ad does is it makes Trump's message seem like the sort of moderate middle message, which is like, the vaccine's coming, we want a vaccine, we're coming out of this, and we can't lock everything down now because we're so close and the economy's coming back. And Joe Biden wants everything to shut down completely, which is not really Joe Biden's message.
Yeah, I think it's important not to throw too much weight behind the influence of this ad, because the Trump campaign didn't have a ton of money, and it really was spitting in the ocean compared to the conversation on all the other things that Trump did. But just as one piece of political content, I think it was probably one of the more effective things they did, and effective in ways that we did not assume based on the incorrect polling we had. The next ad we're going to look at is an appeal to black voters from the Trump campaign.
I was a big Obama supporter. It's okay to be Obama and a Trump supporter because President Trump literally created the best job market and economy for black Americans and Americans of all races. Joe Biden's America was mass incarcerating black men. President Trump set them free. President Trump believes in rehabilitation, not just incarceration. He wants everyone in America to have the opportunity towards success. That's the type of president that we need.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I'm very curious about how you think about this ad now, knowing Trump's performance among non-white voters in the most recent election.
I still think that this ad was another permission structure ad, right? This was Jack Brewer, who's a former NFL player, literally says in the ad, it's okay to be an Obama-Trump supporter. And he is a black man saying this. I think the analysis at the time was that a lot of these ads were not necessarily about winning over black voters, but about letting white voters know that their choice for Trump wasn't a racist choice because there are black Americans supporting Donald Trump. And so if that's the case, you can't be racist for supporting Donald Trump, and it's okay to vote for Donald Trump. That was the analysis then. I still wonder if that analysis is correct, and it may be, but there is some of the results give us an early indication that Trump did a lot better with Latinos. Among black voters, he didn't do any better among black women. But he did do slightly better among black men.
I think it's very easy to overread the small shift in the black vote as some gigantic seismic thing. It's something that the Democratic Party has to look very serious about. We've got to analyze. We've got to understand why it happened. Because I think it has real long-term consequences that we have to look at. Ultimately, black voters put Joe Biden over the top in Georgia and elsewhere, and Joe Biden was able to generate massive turnout among black voters all across the country. In the context of this ad, I still believe this is primarily about convincing white people that it's okay to vote for Trump and not be a racist, because
I think I do too.
You've seen that. We've seen that in focus groups. You saw it in voters that you talked to in the wilderness. This is a hang-up for a lot of people. Some of the most seminal moments of Trump's presidency where he did the most poorly in the polling were the moments where he polarized things on racial issues after Charlottesville and the neo-Nazi fine people comment, his behavior after the George Floyd protests throughout the summer during the sort of the reckoning over structural racism were some of his worst moments. And so I think this is going to fix that at some level. The Trump campaign had a clear, they were pretty explicit about the strategy. And I think we mostly thought it was bullshit that if they could just shave a few points off of Biden's margin among African-American voters, then they could flip some of these states. And they actually came pretty close to doing it certainly in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania less so, but we should be very clear that the overwhelming strategy of Trump and the Republican Party was to keep black people from voting, right? That was voter suppression. There was massive amounts of misinformation spent at black and Latino voters, only some of which we're beginning to understand now. Like, so this one ad or this slight improvement here or there, or what happened in Miami-Dade or the Rio Grande Valley, does not somehow absolve them of a racist, white supremacist political strategy to win an election. The campaign may be over, except for in Donald Trump's head. But my terrible job of trying to convince you to subscribe to this YouTube channel is not over. So I'm going to read to you, with as little enthusiasm as humanly possible, the content that Elijah and Yale have written for me. It's Thanksgiving. What are you thankful for this year? I'm thankful for content. And someone actually wrote this and is still employed by this company, and then it says, unfortunately, I don't have to wait another 365 days to feast. And neither do you. Subscribe to the Crooked Media YouTube channel. And then I'm not going to read the rest because it's too embarrassing. Here's the thing, people. If all of you were to, quote unquote, smash that subscribe button right now, I would never have to do this again. So just think about that. It's the holiday season. Do something nice for me. Okay, the last Trump ad we're going to look at is from some of the more incendiary content from earlier this summer.
You have reached the 911 police emergency line. Due to defunding of the police department, we're sorry, but no one is here to take your call. If you're calling to report a rape, please press 1. To report a murder, press 2. To report a home invasion, press 3. For all other crimes, leave your name and number, and someone will get back to you. Our estimated wait time is currently 5 days. Goodbye.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
We looked at this ad earlier this summer when it came out, and I was pretty dismissive of it and thought you have to make believable attacks. And I don't think you can convince anyone that Joe Biden is going to let people get killed. That is not a credible attack on him. And I still hold to that view. I think this ad, if the goal was to demonize Joe Biden as someone who would defund the police or do those things, the ad failed at that.
Agree.
I think there are two elements of it, though, that I think now appear more successful in hindsight. Raising the salience of law and order issues helped Republicans. It absolutely did. And I think Trump was more successful in doing that than we gave him credit for. Not long after the unrest in Kenosha, the New York Times had these polls come out, and it showed that law and order and crime had risen near the top of voters' concerns in those states, but they did not trust Donald Trump more than Joe Biden on that issue. I think it was basically a tie. But I think because the polling was oversampling and under the wrong voters and undersampling Trump voters, we didn't get the right picture of that. And so this ad did have real success in changing the issue environment. And so therefore, the other part of it, I think we need to explore more, but I think you can at least credibly suggest that it is not unrelated to the sky-high turnout among Trump's base. Like whenever you and I would have conversations about these ads, like the sort of takeaway from this ad is terrible unless it's designed to turn out all of these unregistered white non-college voters in the Midwest that Nate Cohn and Ross Miller
turns
worried
out
about.
that's what happened. Turns out
And
that's what happened.
It bodes very poorly for politics going forward if very explicitly racist appeals designed to scare the living shit out of white people turn out to be incredibly effective ways to turn out Republican voters. We're going to see more of that, not less, now that Donald Trump is headed off the scene.
Well, and I think the next question, of course, is, so what do Democrats do about that? You had a group of activists, some politicians, call for defunding the police. You had a bunch of other Democrats believing that that is a very unpopular position, and so they did not talk about it, ran away from it, did not contend with it. But I think in this information environment, if there is someone talking about defunding the police, it's going to be part of, the Republicans are going to use it in ads like this. It's going to be part of the national conversation. You can't really ignore these controversial policy proposals. You have to find a way to take them on. Like there was a poll that Data for Progress did where they asked, would you support a new first responder agency that addresses issues of addiction and mental health? Overwhelming support for that. 70% of people supported that, right? And again, polls are a little off here and there, but when you get 70%, that's a huge number. But most people don't know that that's one policy proposal around defunding the police. If you just hear the words defund the police, like, I don't know how you can be blamed for thinking it means that the police are just not going to be there at all. I do think that Democrats have to figure out a way to respond to ads like these as opposed to just ignore them and hope that the issue will go away.
One thing Republicans did very, very effectively in this campaign was they changed the conversation to more favorable issue territory for themselves. You can't sit on an edict that says only use poll-tested language. We should not try to, in any way, shape, or form, stem the ambitions of activists who want to push the conversation forward. But how, like, what is the Democratic version of the law and order strategy of Republicans? What emotional issue can we tap into that moves the conversation into a place that is more friendly to us? Can you run a ruthlessly effective campaign that is as emotional and taps into people's emotions on economic issues as Republicans do on race and culture and law and order? That is a big question I think we have to explore, because given how this election played out, we can never assume low Republican turnout again. We are going to have to both persuade and mobilize, and given the constraints of the Senate map and the Electoral College, we don't really have a choice there.
We've always known that polarization and partisan identity were some of the strongest forces in politics in this entire country, and it has been for a while. Polarization and partisan identity may have even been stronger than a global pandemic and terrible recession. What your partisan identity is and where you stand on Donald Trump, that may have been more important than how you felt about the pandemic, or it may have dictated how you looked at the pandemic, which was another, right? Like, perhaps people's views of the pandemic and how those views connected to politics didn't actually change with the severity of the pandemic. Perhaps, like, if you were a person who liked Trump or voted for Trump, you saw the entire pandemic unfold through a different lens than if you were someone who hated Donald Trump. That could be what we end up finding out.
This is a pretty depressing finding when you think about how we tackle even bigger challenges like climate change.
Well, and it's depressing in what you just said, which is how do Democrats find issues that are more related to identity, particularly around economics, that might help us in the future if Republicans try to demagogue race and law and order issues. Here's my question on this ad. I wonder if this ad and this message were the absolute right message to beat Donald Trump, but perhaps the wrong message to sweep in a Democratic majority down ballot.